Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Human from a Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 9. High Chief Williamson, Adventurer Level NA, Orc Kokenian. I gazed longingly out my window at the mountains in the distance, a wall of gigantic snow-capped teeth separating the Orcish High Chiefdom of Kokena from the Elven Kingdom of Bolasir. As a youth, I would trek those very mountains, hunting dangerous game and living in the rough. It was the best childhood the son of a high chief could ask for, and my father had given to me gladly, mostly because he couldn't stand children, but also because he wanted me to be strong enough to take his place. My gaze returned to the mountain of paperwork upon my desk, a much more difficult climb, with higher stakes as well. Paperwork is boring, but if it's done wrong or delayed, many can suffer. I envy the chiefs of small villages who rarely have to do any paperwork at all, although they have to listen to complaints in person rather than reading a strongly worded letter. So, we'll call it a draw. A knock on my door alerted me to Raisin's presence, one of many aides that help me keep things running. I glanced at him as he said, "Sire, we have received a missive from Emperor Jack, Slayer of Demons, Savior of Dwarves, Destroyer of—"
Yes. Yeah, Jack has many impressive and lengthy titles, missiver. He finally figured out I can read, Then, I asked with a chuckle.
"It looks that way, High Chief." Raisin gave me the envelope containing the missive, and I felt a tinge of dread as I noticed its thickness. I broke the wax seal with a claw and pulled the contents out into the light. 20 pages.
"God damn it. This has better not be about that damn mine, or I'm going to declare war, I swear," I roared.
"Sire, it's almost definitely about the mine. You've been ignoring his requests regarding it for years," Raisin said calmly. I turned to glare at him.
"That's because he wants us to let his people mine the metal while giving us a percentage of the metal as a tax. Considering that this is our mine, and we know how to mine, I see no reason to pay him any heed."
"Come on, sir. You know these people can mine better than we can. Most of our miners think that the dwarves will be able to pull more metal ore than we can, too. Might end up with more tax than we were doing it ourselves."
"Is that right?" I said sarcastically. "And we might as well let the damned elves construct our buildings and affecting gnomes run our economy, right? And what's left for us, Dungeon running, scavenging the wastes. And what do we do if the drow decide that they need to lengthen their border, Will we be able to rely on the dwarves, elves, or gnomes to come to our aid?"
"No, sir," Raisin stated with the attitude of someone dealing with a toddler.
"Exactly. If he wants to be involved in the mine, he can teach our miners how to do it."
I grumbled as an idea popped into my head.
"Wait. That's not a bad idea. We can offer to hire his dwarves as supervisors and traders, and give them a much smaller percentage. Have Paulo meet with the Miners' Guild and come up with some numbers. Then have a missive drawn up to reply to whatever this garbage says."
"Yes, High Chief," Raisin nodded as he left. I nearly threw the missive across the room, but decided that I'd better check it first. It was too polite to have been written by Jack. Like most dwarves, he can't help but curse constantly. I chuckled at all the titles they had for me. It felt good to be recognized, even if it was just for flattery. The actual content of this missive was indeed about the mines, but it also contained a warning regarding the drow. They were performing military maneuvers again. I'd have to increase our presence on that border. I made a note to include a gratuity to Jack for the information, despite how annoyed we were at each other. Our people are friends, and what impacts us impacts them. The drow taking a bite out of us means less trade for them, and a higher risk of the drow taking a bite out of them as well. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean they'll fight them with us. The Dwarven Empire of Calcutta was more into manufacturing than they were into warfare. There were other Dwarven kingdoms that were more focused on warfare, but those kingdoms didn't have an Orcish High Chiefdom as their neighbor. If they did, their tune would likely change pretty quickly. Well, so long as those Orcs were fight-focused. There's plenty who aren't. My grandfather is considered one of the most peaceful Mer to have ever lived. Actually, come to think of it, he might have been able to convince those kings to become peaceful just by his example alone. I chuckled at the thought, and another knock shook my door.
"What is it?"
I demanded. "Hi, Chief. There's a messenger from Nuleva," Raisin said breathlessly, as if he'd run back here. "You're going to want to hear this in person." Nuleva. The name was familiar. But from where? One of mine? Would have to be a small settlement, then Oh, don't tell me that one of the chiefs is dumb enough to make a village on the Drow border. Raisin noticed my confusion and explained. Nuleva is a village we installed at the entrance to the Dubois mine.
"Oh, what do they want?"
I asked. My question was met with a look of exasperation. I returned the look with a glare, but Raisin is as stubborn as a pregnant fat horns. It occurred to me that we were both somewhat in the wrong.
"Fine, fair enough. Bring them in,"
I relented. Raisin turned to the outside of the door and gestured for someone out of view, then fully entered the room. A minute later, a monstrous orc in dark and full plate entered and kneeled. It took me a second to recognize him. Alern, son of Ogano, my nephew. Alern took a moment before finally saying,
"Greetings, High Chief Golomak, son of Kashgrau, the giant, savior of—" "That's enough of that, Alern," I interrupted. "My own kin shouldn't have to prostrate themselves before me. I understand it. You have a message for me."
"Yes, sir," Alern said as he looked at me. "We've encountered some oddities in the Dubois dungeon. The Chief Galern sent me to appraise you." I'd forgotten that Galern took over for his brother in the Dubois project. The thought of that hothead being chief was enough to amuse even the most stoic orc. Unfortunately, my amusement was dashed by the stench of grief coming from Alern. The boy who was normally cheerful and gentle was now robotic and stiff, his smile replaced by a grim expression that spoke of loss. I nodded to Raisin, who grabbed the cushion and set it next to the boy.
"Sit and explain, Alern. What happened?"
I said gently. "Yes, sir," he replied, as he sat cross-legged in the cushion. "A while ago, a wall collapsed in the dungeon, revealing a previously hidden passage." He explained at length about what had happened, and with every sentence my concern grew. A sentient thing called a human had been found and removed from the dungeon, and a boss that killed 2 over 10s had been encountered. Galern's plan to seal the passage to the boss was a sound one, but it might be a stopgap, especially since it sounded like the dungeon had already shifted twice, and the hidden portion didn't change.
"Does Nuleva have any over 20s? I asked once he finished.
"No, sir. Dubois was labeled an entry-level dungeon. The only reason that Galern had over 10s at his disposal was because we became adventurers there," Alern said, gritting his teeth to stifle a sob.
"I'm sorry about your comrade, dear nephew. He will be avenged. If you'd like to be either on the team I send, I can convince the adventurers to allow it."
"No, sir. I would only be a hindrance. That beast is my exact counter, just like Kirasaka was. A fool would think this to be cowardice, but I saw it for what it was. A warrior who knew that he was outmatched and responsible enough to not weigh down those who would be fighting. Little Alern had grown into a very good orc indeed.
"Raisin, have Illicit gather a group of old 20s who are a good match for this thing and prepare to send them to Nuleva. Alern, you'll rest here and travel back with the group we send. Let Gluher know that they answer directly to me, and he is to provide them with food, water, and shelter. I'll handle their pay. Understood?"
"Yes, High Chief," Alern and Raisin said simultaneously. Raisin immediately set about his task, and Alern rose from the cushion. He picked it up and put it back. Like the responsible mer I know him to be, he then turned his back to me, waiting to be dismissed.
"How's your father, boy?"
I asked. "I wouldn't know, sir. Haven't heard from him in 2 years," he said, finally smiling. I grinned back. Ogurno, my little brother, was legendarily aloof. He cared, but didn't know how to show it, and simply decided it would be best if he didn't. Alern's not his only child, but since his mother has been patient enough to handle the long disappearances, he's the only one who's seen the most of his father's love, which is probably why the boy couldn't resist chuckling at his father's foibles.
"Well, that's good news then. If something had happened, it would have been heard across the entire continent."
We both laughed at the truth of that statement. Ogurno had become an adventurer instead of a chief, and quickly showed onlookers why it isn't fair for someone of my bloodline to become one. His last big fight had been against a corrupted high dragon, and it had left scars in the landscape that still haven't healed. Even his son was a powerhouse, and was one of the youngest over 20s in history. If Alern had turned out to be a bit faster, that monster in Dalbert wouldn't have stood a chance. We discussed the rest of Alern's family and how his career had been going. He recounted tales of fights within the wastes against gigantic beasts, and funny stories involving his comrades. Then we discussed how the nation was faring, and I was careful not to go into too much detail regarding the troubles with the drow. Finally, our conversation came to a close. "I think I'll head to the chow hall. I've missed a fat horn steak that you have here," Alern said with a chuckle.
"Right," I replied with a chuckle. "Oh, and Alern, I understand that the human has been adopted into the Alta family, but I'd still like to know more about it. I don't mind how this happens, whether it be an informal interrogation or if we arrange a meeting. But I don't like mysteries."
"Yes, High Chief, I'll do what I can," Alern nodded. I rested my chin on my hand as I thought about the futures of our nation. Was this human a good omen or a bad one? The latter seemed somewhat likely, considering what else had been found in the secret passage. I was distracted by this line of thought until my eyes once again rested on the mountain of paperwork on my desk. Damn. Well, back to work. End of chapter. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Dragzoon W.R.E, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, Jon Carrington, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.